What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Actuali Podcast, where we endeavor to discover how we may change this world from the inside out. It's all about an orientation, a posture, a way of being that we focus on here in Actuali, even as we cover current events and ancient philosophy and all things relating to how we may create an upward spiral to counteract the downward spiral our species finds itself in. We recognize that the truest change comes from within. Thank you guys so much for joining us here today. I'm Chris.
I'm DJ.
And today we are going to continue our coverage of Benjamin Boyce's conversation with Jordan Hall. These are definitely two figures to keep track of. What they point at in this conversation is quite profound, and I hope it serves you well. So before we jump back into the conversation between Benjamin and Jordan, I wanted to share a clip from a movie I watched sometime last week that really just kind of blew me away. YouTube, please do not strike us for this. We're only going to show 40 seconds of this film. The film, titled Synchronic, directed by Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead, they co-direct together, is just magnificent. Justin serves as the writer and director. This is like a directing team, and Aaron serves as the cinematographer in the films that they work on together. This film was great. A short synopsis is that there's this new designer drug that's being sold at head shops that people are taking, and the two main characters are like EMTs that are responding to the different emergency calls they're getting related to people that have taken this synthetic substance. And I don't want to say anything more because it would give the story away, but there was a scene towards the end of this film where actor Anthony Mackie, in his character, is just says something really powerful to his close friend, and it relates very much to the subject matter of this episode. So let's go ahead and jump on over to this. You guys can watch this with us. Here we go.
This is delicious. This dirty, shitty river, this beer.
Oh, I'm sorry, guys. It's not actually showing. It's for some reason I got the wrong.
On the
Let me fix this real fast here. My yeah, for some reason it's not showing up on the screen.
Maybe it's maybe YouTube's getting smarter.
It may be. It may be.
I've been noticing lately, though, the amount of commercials, or excuse me, ads, is going through the freaking roof. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's not showing up. That is, wow, that's interesting. So it could be because this is a movie, so we're just going to be able to hear the dialogue, I guess.
It's important. So it's two dudes sitting in a park.
Yeah.
By a dirty river.
Yes,
pretty much.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and let's listen to this real fast, guys. From the movie Synchronic.
This is delicious. This dirty, shitty river, this beer. It's time. Wouldn't change it. The clock just keeps ticking down, and the lower that number gets, you realize how fucking amazing now is.
That's such a good point, man. When you experience something particularly tragic or traumatic in life, the preciousness of life can really become pronounced to us. Just to continue the very end of this.
The present is a miracle, bro.
Present is a miracle. Present is a miracle. We get so lost in our thoughts. We're all always caught up in either the past or the future, whereas past is like our reservations and regrets. The future is our fears, worries, expectations about things not working out in the future. And our mind is always playing around in one of these two states. Whereas we can be present right here and now and much more fully be in relationship with reality as it is in this moment, not tied up in the ego's constant monkey mind thinking mode. Really like that scene. You guys check out this movie, Synchronic. It's on YouTube right now, and you can watch it for free with ads.
Extra ads.
Yeah. I actually pay for YouTube Premium at this point, so I don't have to worry about commercials anymore, which is nice, but then I'm giving money to YouTube, which, I have mixed feelings about.
Man, I was trying to show my dad Cowboy Bebop because, he's a big fan of film noir as well as Westerns. And, Cowboy Bebop is an anime, but it's very, heavy into the film noir and Western tropes. And, it's a great soundtrack, just great all around. And it was on Hulu, which my dad has a subscription to, and he pays money for. And for a 22-minute episode, there was like 10 commercials, and they were each like 90 seconds long. So it was like almost more time on commercial, and you're paying for this.
I remember when they first
like,
came out
what?
with like Netflix, and and even Netflix has ads now, if I'm correct.
Yeah. Well, and
I got rid of Netflix a while back. When they came out with that movie Cuties, and I was like, man, you guys, you're not getting my money anymore. This is disturbing.
Well,
they also canceled The Midnight Gospel, like season 2 of that. That show was a hit. I don't know why they did that to Duncan. Oh, Duncan Trussell. That's a great show. You guys should check that out as well. That last season blew me away. Brings some beautiful tears to your eyes. That last episode, that is. All right, guys, so now we're going to jump back into our conversation with Benjamin Boyce and Jordan Hall. Where we left off, they were speaking of how, due to us humans not integrating the traumas and lessons learned from our elders and their own suffering, wisdom is not being handed down. So the suffering, the traumas that we experience are not being integrated in a useful way. So let's pick up where we left off here. This is going to cover just the last couple minutes that we ended on last episode. Here we go.
This notion of healing is very connected to the notion of wholeness. Right? Your own wholeness, like how do you integrate things in yourself so you can come into wholeness, but actually your wholeness with reality, with life. And how only you being whole are able to sort of enter into a proper, non-constricted or defensive relationship with the world you're entering into. So as harm accrues, if that harm cannot be metabolized into a kind of wisdom, and it cannot be integrated into something which can then be transmitted to form lineage, continuity of contact across time, into something that has a quality of relational being itself, an identity that is, transitioning. Two things happen. One is that that harm it accumulates, right? And as we try to create constructs out of mostly mental models, right? We try to create constructs out of the narratives, ideologies, stories that we tell ourselves, of course, various forms of repression, like all those different elements. Obviously, repression is not going to heal the harm; it just literally holds it, and that begins to build up over time in a wide variety of different ways. And we begin to get what Vervaeke calls reciprocal closure, because your ability, how do you say, like 3 things happen. You haven't actually taken advantage of the suffering of those who have come before you. And I don't mean that at all meanly. I mean, literally, why suffer? Well, the reason why you suffer is so that you can produce wisdom as a result.
Yeah.
All right. So you don't benefit from the fact that those who have come before you have suffered so that you can receive that wisdom. That's cut off. You're cut off from that.
Yeah.
Second.
That's important, because otherwise we're just kind of in this oppositional orientation to reality, and what we resist persists, as the old adage goes. So what is a third way? How can we transcend that opposition style of approach that we so easily fall into, especially in this age of divide and conquer methodology? We go on.
Yeah. because you're actually accumulating all these pieces of unintegrated harm and usually various kinds of coping mechanisms, you're carrying a heavier load as you're not benefiting from wisdom. And third, because you're carrying a heavier load as you're not benefiting from wisdom, you literally become less capable of being in relationship with the reality you're experiencing. So there's an accelerating level, right?
So we're carrying a heavier psychological load now, and we're less able to actually operate within and respond to reality adequately.
That's from the point of view of the meaning crisis, that's the cascade effect catastrophe. And so that happens. That is part of what happens. It happens.
Yeah.
And it seems as if, you know, at least in the West, culturally speaking, you know, we tend to look back on the past and just be like, you know, oh, you know, those in the past were backwards and they're evil and they did horrible, you know, things, you know, whether it's, you know, slavery or war or, you know, pick your poison. But we're not appreciating the fact that they suffered through that, changed through that, built the wisdom, and we're only focusing on the, say, the suffering opposed to the wisdom that comes out of suffering.
Through integrating, like really understanding their suffering,
Yeah.
you know, in a way that we are deeply sympathizing with it.
And not in like not understanding in a way like a who's to blame kind of way. It's like, well, you know.
No, but feeling it.
Yeah.
Right. Laden with it on that level.
And moving through it into wisdom yourself, you know, that's why it's important to read history or like even, you know, good fiction can do this too. You know, it can create
absolutely
a premise that then you with individuals involved that if it's written right, you kind of like bond with them a little bit and you get emotionally involved, and then their suffering becomes your suffering, and as they move through it, you gain, you know, the wisdom that the character gains. And if you have a really good writer, they can encode some pretty deep and profound lessons within, say, like a story about, you know, a kid, a sword, and a dragon.
So we can gain insights on how to be and how to operate in this world, even from
fiction. Without suffering and without actually going through that kind of suffering too.
Personally, yeah.
You know, I think that's why a lot of people, like, even if you're not a fiction person, but nonfiction stories, like, you know, historical stories about, like, say, individuals that have gone through stuff and all that stuff, it really grips you. And it's not just, you know, oh, it's something to feel. There's something being done, not like to you, but something happening within you that is beneficial for your existence in and with the environment that you're in, you know, this world, this
in your community.
Yeah.
Great point. Yeah, let's jump on back here, and as they continue the conversation, we're gonna learn about this cascading effect catastrophe that we can get caught up in here. Transitioning back.
It happens at the level of the environment. It happens at the level of our sociological and financial systems, and it happens at the level of the human mind and spirit.
Really, economically and environmentally, as well as psychologically.
Totally.
Yeah.
In much the same way, by the way.
Yeah. Was there a moment when you felt that and it overwhelmed you? Then how did you integrate?
Okay. Well, that's about what I wanted to cover there. So that was just a continuation of the previous part of that conversation. Now we're going to jump ahead into how humility can be gained through suffering, how learning hard lessons can humble us. Yeah.
And for those who aren't aware, humble and humility come from the same roots. So to be to be humiliated is to be humble, and to learn humility. So it's weird how words, really English words, come together like that.
Languages.
Yeah.
All right, here we go, guys.
I don't know, but if you take the technological route, it's really easy to think that you're the master of the universe, and you start behaving like that.
Yeah, self-idolatry is very difficult to avoid when you take the technological route.
Yeah. But it's also inherent in any in the other way too. Just as a defense mechanism by being broken down over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you maintain humility? I guess I'm
yeah. How do you maintain humility
when being broken down over and over and over again?
Yeah, I think that's proper. Humility is in my case specifically, a profoundly one and always inadequate disposition, like to the level of actually, like at the level of personality, which is interesting because it also connects very deeply with joy. Humility and joy are very kin. And grief, humility, joy, and grief are all very, very kin to each other.
That's an interesting point there. Humility, joy, and grief are together. So learning these hard lessons, it humbles us, it opens us up to the beauty of the present moment. Joy becomes accessible. Grief is a way of grieving that suffering in a healthy manner that opens us back up to the beauty and the preciousness of the present. So now on to suffering and death.
Well, yeah, actually, before
To
you go on
joy
that,
through surrender. Go ahead.
yeah, like, we have traditions and rituals around this. Like when somebody dies, everybody gets together and humbles themselves, and whether it's like a viewing or not, but you go to the service, and um and you center the community around, I know this is morbid, but around the dead individual, and then by extension the experiences everybody's had with them. And then through that, like, afterwards, the wake and the party afterwards, you get that joy out of this very humble, grief-stricken state.
That shared compassion and understanding.
And that kind of ritual of how we, deal with death and, have a funeral and do all that stuff is very much doing that for us.
It's like what is sacred comes to the fore in these moments.
Yeah.
Ooh, yeah. Good stuff. Let's go.
When you witness the absolute certainty of the suffering and, of course, in fact, inevitable death of a baby, an infant who, maybe will live 40, 50, 70 years, but they are going to suffer tremendously. That's just the nature of being a human, and they're going to die. And everyone who they love will ultimately both betray them and give them joy and will die. And you can witness that and also perceive that that is the ground upon which all joy is based.
Wow. Okay. So that's a continuation of that point. That is the ground upon which all joy is based. Is this making sense so far? I hope I'm not jumping ahead too much. I want to make sure that this tracks for everybody viewing along with us. Well, let me get us up to the next section, because now we're going to start talking about, this is where it starts going really deep. Start looking at the responsible use of power, which is a tool, but it must be wisely held.
Well, it's one of the components of work, as far as physically speaking. Like, what is it? Work done over time is power, something like that. I might have the equation wrong, but basically, you have your goal, be the work, right? The aspect of it, and then you'd have time. How much time does it take? And then, well, okay, it only took so much of amount of time to achieve your goal. That's how much power is in the system.
And a conscientious use of that time and that power.
Yeah.
It comes from a place of wisdom and understanding that we're all interlinked.
Yeah, and just because you're powerful doesn't necessarily mean that you're wise. You could have...
Oh, no.
Well, we've seen it in the communist regimes. They had a whole heaping lot of power, and they were doing a lot of work very quickly, but there was no wisdom behind it, and it ended up shredding,
destroying itself.
It lasted longer than, you'd think, but it still ended up shredding itself apart.
Yeah.
We see that along the way.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of like tuning your car up too much and then throwing nitrous in it, and your car's not designed for that, and then it explodes. Yeah, it was, a really badass car there.
It's useful for the drag race, but now the car's fried.
Yeah.
Now the engine's fried. So, and we see this here, in capitalistic nations, when corporatism takes over these systems of self-governance, such as our own, capitalism becomes crony capitalism. Now that free market system has been corrupted and is being bent to the will of people that have no interest in the constitutions of those countries that actually gave them a method to be enriched by in the first place.
So responsible use of power.
Yeah.
Keyword responsible.
Amen. Here we go.
Yeah, it's in my case very much reluctantly. I don't want it. Every time I've touched anything that has like real power to it, it's hard, right? And of course, that's the point. Right? The story of the Christian story is that one who was most able to hold responsibility literally took responsibility for the suffering of the entire cosmos in his crucifixion. And that's exactly the right way of thinking about it. And so that responsibility it doesn't look good. It looks bad.
Yeah, no. Yeah, it's the inverted pyramid. Yeah.
Yeah, you got it. Hey, I use that metaphor a lot.
That's a great metaphor too. So the inverted pyramid, instead of having power over everybody underneath you, you realize that your power is to be used in service of all. So you flip the pyramid upside down. Now you're in service to everyone, and you see them above you, and in the flip of the pyramid.
Well, and you could, imagine keep the pyramid the same way, but then realizing that, there is power and force in the bottom blocks of the pyramid supporting the top, the top capstone. And yes, the capstone is the terminus.
Ooh, yeah, you're recognizing the
but all,
import
all
of
of,
that base.
and I know it's just, potential energy at that point, but there's a lot of energy and power in those stones that are below it. But we tend to forget that. We just tend to think it's like, the most power is concentrated on the top. And that's very rarely the case because, like, you have to convince a lot of people to go with you to do something. Just one powerful man with no followers, yeah, maybe he can, outpower a few people, but he's not going to be able to take over the village or the town. But then he gets a village worth of people following him. Maybe he can take over a city, gets more. So really that pinnacle is just the point that we look at and say, okay, well, that's where the power, without realizing the power that's actually deep within, the base structure, if you will.
Yeah. It's using power to influence and manipulate others rather than in service of others.
Yeah.
But there's not a relational aspect there. There's no sense of communion with those that you are serving.
No, they're just something to hold you up, or if you're the ones holding him up, the thing that is holding you down. Like, well, that capstone isn't necessarily holding everything down. Everything else is also holding itself down as well. Power goes both ways. And well, it both ways and another both ways, in the sense that, yeah, the people have power and the individual on top has the power, and they go in counter ways. But then there's also people oppress themselves. They do it every day. They do it mentally. They oppress themselves. They have the excuse of why I can't. And a lot of times they hear it's because it's somebody else. It's the man. It's this, that, or the other. But really, like, at the end of
Blaming the other, blaming the outside.
and to a certain extent, if you have a really tyrannical government or a really tyrannical parent or something like that, there might be some truth to that. But at the end of the day, the power lies within yourself.
There's a deeper root
to fulfill your relationship with the universe, or even just locally, relationship
To find
with
ways to
anybody else.
positively and constructively counteract forces that are using power for evil.
Yeah.
So, in approaching truth seems to have these built-in safeguards. So, we're looking at how we can get our ego, our fear-driven mentality out, and our programming and conditioning out of the way when we're approaching truth. Jordan speaks on that now.
If you're contacted by people who are trying to figure out reality in order to protect reality, and they're operating, assuming, let's just say they're operating under virtue, right? But they are also looking for tools that have tremendous power. A part and parcel of teaching them about that is teaching them how to approach truth, right? Is truth not in some way guards itself from power and corruption? Like in essence, like the way to seek truth is to conform oneself to the truth, which means that you go through a process of purification, preparation, and perfection in order to, as you approach truth, right?
Yes.
Great question. There does seem to be a process that we indeed must go through in order to responsibly wield power and approach what is true.
Yeah, and he used the term conform, and I think that question kind of relates to when Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, the way. You can, it's and you can be too if you conform to the way, if you walk upon the path. And remember, conform means to like shape around and shape in into, like your hand conforms to the cup when you pick it up to use it. If you conform to the path by staying on the path and moving along the path. So does I guess your relationship with truth may be not a result, but a function of how well you can conform to said truth. And
Of being true to oneself, self-honest, true with the world.
yeah, you know, in a participatory, personal, experiential way, opposed to just taking a proclamation as the truth. You know, yeah, you can say it all day that it's true, but if you haven't conformed to it and try to figure it out and try to work it out and apply it to your life, can you really actually even tell if it's true or not? So,
Bad. All right, guys, we jumping back.
Distinction. Same thing happens on the other side, for example. Like communion is that which brings plurality together into a wholeness. Temptation brings plurality together into a disordered or an inverted wholeness. So there's always these mirror images. Same thing happens with truth. There's an archetype, a prototype, a mythotype that produces something which is a simulacrum of truth and conveys power and is available to the unpure, right? Is it
So a simulacrum would be like an imitation of truth.
available to? And so you have a journey where you can go one journey where the truth is humility. The truth is surrender to the divine and surrender to your understanding. Your understanding is not part of the story, and it is a critical piece. Surrender your idolatry of all idols, which is say surrender your notion that you can control the world on the basis of your preferences, most notably yourself. Accept the cross that is yours to bear, which may be radically out of alignment with your identity. Probably is radically out of alignment with your identity. And that's the truth. Well, if you don't like the taste of that their water, there's another guy who's selling sugar water on the side of the road, which has a little tea on it, and it tastes real good. And that's the distinction I'm trying to make.
Oh, there's big T truth and little T truth, right?
Yes.
Well, and that goes back to the sophists of ancient times, then sophistry. It's sweetness, it's salience, it's upfrontness without any truth behind it, and we say that those things are bullshit. They're they like what's a common phrase that we used to hear all the time? Oh, just follow your bliss, or just work on yourself, and like, yeah, well, that tastes good. But then as you keep drinking it, you get sicker and sicker and sicker, that just follow your bliss. Now you're in your 40s, you ain't got no one, nobody, nothing. You've been following your bliss. You ain't got no family. Maybe they all died off because they got old and you didn't bother to have kids or maintain a relationship with your siblings and then, your nieces and nephews and all that stuff because you were following your own bliss. You were finding yourself.
Yeah.
Yes, that sounds good, but that's the little T truth. Yes, you do need to find yourself, but a lot more to it than just going out there and selfishly consuming experience, right?
Well said. So working on ourselves is, of course, important, but doing so without a mindfulness of our relation with those around us, this allows us the opportunity for feedback and to see that if what we're doing is actually working. And so we really need that feedback and that bounce back from those around us. We need to be working on ourselves in a sense that we understand that we are in a relation with everything and everyone around us.
I think that's where humility and suffering come in, and not necessarily like pain suffering, but like the dukkha suffering, the
sense of a wheel off kilter.
Yeah, the constant threat of shaking oneself apart. And if you can move through that, and you can do it truthfully and humbly, you can see more clearly the results of the work you've been doing and the power you've been wielding, opposed to just avoiding and putting off, say, suffering, and pushing it away and not thinking about it, and not having a relationship with your suffering too. There's no wisdom that you'll get out of just pushing it, sweeping it under the rug and getting away from it. We see that a lot. Like if you've ever gone to like the festival scene, they call them music festivals, but they're really drug festivals. really. But
with a lot of good music.
and also a lot of really cool people, and it's just fun to hang out, regardless of whether you do drugs.
But that
or
is
not.
one of the number one reasons
Well,
people
well,
go
you'll
to
see
some of those.
You'll see
festivals.
that trying to oh no, everything's gravy and everything's cool, and like the people who are saying it the most and everything and walking by tend to be the ones that at the end of the thing, the end of the event are all like strung out on the ketamine, and then you actually all the glitter and face paint washes off, and you just see how miserable they actually are, even though they were trying to fake it till you make it, which is true, little t true in some ways, but then also kind of like big F false.
Yeah, doing things to have these high level transcendent experiences are all well and good, but if they're not being done so in a way that we can healthfully integrate and actually bring them into our lives instead of just kind of go on a trip and get to some high level of realization, but not be able to bring it home and incorporate it into your way of being, then what's the point?
Yeah, I think that's
so, because oftentimes we're just going to use things like distractions, drugs, Doritos, what have you, are all distractions. We're trying to fill a void in our hearts, and we're coming up with all these simulacrums, these artificial fillers that are not the actual thing. It's like trying to put a square shape into a circular shaped hole.
Well, and I think this is what he's talking about with, communion is bringing these things, these separate things together, but in order, whereas temptation is bringing these separate things together in disorder.
Yes. Very well said. And so a humble surrender to the divine, however one wishes to see that, the source, God, the transcendent, all, oneness, whatever. A humble surrender to a transcendent goodness. A surrendering of control and one's preferences for how things should be. That, and then finding the cross that is ours to bear personally, which oftentimes, as Jordan suggests, may not be what one expected. That's key. I think that's really key. So now we're going to learn a little bit more about humility and wholeness of relationship, and communion versus temptation, so that we can responsibly wield power.
By the way, so the answer is first pray. Humility, pray as much as possible. Ideally constantly, but I haven't figured that out yet.
Yeah.
Second, relationship. Nothing can go across something which is not actually founded on wholeness of relationship. Like, okay, we actually have to have a relationship before we're going to have a real, anything really meaningful is going to go across this connection. It's really relationship first, communication last.
Okay, relationship first before we even try and communicate. We must have a deep and abiding, true surrender to a loving relationship with our fellows and with the situation that we are trying to resolve. A surrender and a humility before that situation, no matter how offensive or discomforting it may be. A wholeness of relationship.
Well, it's
because we have to be full of care. That's what he means when he talks about care. To be careful is to be full of care.
Yeah, and he mentioned first pray. If we just look at the physicality of praying, what do you usually think? Like in Islam, you're down on all fours with your face against the floor. You're, prostrate. And say Christianity, you can see kneeling next to your bed. But what these are these motions that humble yourself physically while you're then
towards something greater,
building your relationship. Because prayer isn't just like hey Sky Daddy, give me a truck. Right. It's building a relationship and then communicating. But first comes the humility, and as humans, we like to use not just visual symbols, but like physical symbols of doing stuff to get us into these modes.
And we want to relate with something greater than ourselves. The problem is that we keep on making these ideologies to relate with as something greater than ourselves, like the movement, the work, things like that. And we need something that transcends all of that, an ultimate example of ultimate goodness, and the most deep form of love that we could possibly imagine. So this is where you get into the transcendent realm, and that's why having some sense of the sacred is so important to us as humans, because otherwise we subjugate that to some kind of system or ideology that ultimately ends up turning us against ourselves.
Yeah, it's like the tendency, the urge, and the capacity to look for the sacred, or to, let's say, sacred is a space in that you put things in. That's always going to be there. And if you remove, say, like, a religious or spiritual based system from that, then what you put in that sacred space, tends to be material. And well, we've seen what happens with that. The past,
And this isn't to say that our religions are perfect by any means. They are practiced by infallible beings, fallible beings that can fail and do fail. And so we can come up with these transcendent ideals and not live up to them, but they are so transcendent and so beyond us, they actually give us infinite room to grow towards and improve towards.
And I think we tend to forget that religions, even even Islam, which is one that really hasn't changed for 1,200 years, still is an evolutionary kind of thing. It evolves. Religions evolve through time. Even the most stringent religions are still vastly different than they were 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago.
Our conception of what we call God grows along with us.
Well, and as we advance technologically and literally, as literature and artistically, our ability to understand the universe changes, and how we understand the universe still changes. I'm not saying that the right course of action is to worship the new or anything like that, but realizing that throughout time things change, things evolve, things conform and deform, for better or for worse. Hopefully, if you've got a good religion or a good spiritual practice, it can evolve without losing its core
ideals.
Its core function.
Core function.
I don't like that word, but that's the best word I got for it right now. But like what it does,
bringing us into states of communion and appreciation of something greater than all of whatever concepts we can come up with, whatever ideas we can come up with. There's always going to be something greater. That's what religion gives us.
Well, because ultimately the idea of religion and the practice of religion is older than any religion.
In any kind of ideology or process that we come up with, it should be subservient to something greater than it, so that we can aim it and utilize it properly. There's got to be this transcendent ideal of good, and what a beautiful expression of that we've gotten through our various world religions and persons like Jesus Christ and Buddha and so forth. So jumping on over here again, we're going to look at how necessary an intimacy of relationship is to allow us to develop communion rather than given to temptation, so that we can help each other mutually discern what our calling in life. It's a thing that we can't do on our own. We go.
All the details. The whole point of this thing is we're here to help each other mutually discern what our calling and vocation is. So until we've cultivated something like intimacy of relationship with each other, and we've cultivated a relationship was strong enough to have almost an identity of its own, right? We've entered into communion, not temptation. That's why I brought that up, right? There's the form of coming together, which is temptation, when, benefit, mutual benefit. I can get something, you can get something. That's temptation. No, communion. There's something going on that's actually deeper than either of our ability to even perceive what matters or what values.
Yeah, deeper than our mutual
benefit. Which is part of an identity that we will become that is different than the identity we're at now. Just think about that as a simple way of thinking about it.
Beautiful.
Okay. When you've reached that level, then what flows across that relationship is now going to have surprisingly healthy, very confusing sometimes. Like, I didn't expect that's what was going to happen in this relationship. Interesting.
Yeah.
And is built on a solid foundation. So you can start doing stuff from there.
Okay. I like how we put that. Thoughts on that?
Yeah. Not the temptation relationship, but the communion relationship. So, the temptation relationships, like the example he gave, you'll get something out of it and I'll get something out of it. It's
that
like
mutual benefit. Yeah.
Yeah. Where as say the communion end would be
That works for a while until it doesn't.
participating with each other in a way as if there is a value that is beyond anything that we could ever put a mark on.
That we both can comprehend and partake in, and then we can develop almost like a shared greater identity that we both get to uniquely be involved in our own particular unique
and
ways.
so that's a relationship that's more of like you get something out of it and I get something out of it. It's just something. It is now an ever opening, much moreness relationship that's constantly opening and getting
We're in
broader
service to
and
that
more
moreness.
defined.
Yeah.
And then the communication that will come out of that will be truer to what ultimately we are striving to do here in this world, more than just procreate, get money, get comfortable, die. There's something much more than that. And this isn't like new. This is as old as humans are. We've somehow early on figured out methods and ways to not just survive and spread our genes, but create vast cultures and art and further this this experience. Like if you want to go the Gnostic route, the God making itself in real time thing. We are doing that. We are, and I guess the better or the more ordered the relationship is, probably the better and longer it's going to last. You could have a summer fling with a girl and everything's cool and it's hot and passionate and everything, but it's just both of you are just getting something out of it, right? Or you develop a long-lasting relationship with somebody over time that's what is it?
Beyond mutually beneficial.
Yeah, it's a mutually opening, continuously opening, reciprocal opening to each other over time, and then now you have a wife, a family, another thing about praying and being humble as well. 2 times that you'll see a man get on his knees is when he's proposing to his wife and he's begging for forgiveness. So, the humbling himself thing, and at the root of it, humbling yourself enough to have a relationship that is trying to move towards that thing that is more than
either of us,
the definition you can put on it.
Yeah, more than either of us personally want to receive. It's like we're taking our love and recognizing that love can be in service to something greater. So the loving glow of our relationship can be an offering to the world then, because we're coming from a place of a deeper appreciation of life and the sacred and those things that matter the most.
Yeah. And what a good place to start, but from the bottom on your knees and then growing up, moving through it.
All right, guys, so now we're going to look at how technology and machines are kind of like in service to themselves. These systems that we come up with are great at furthering themselves. How do we help them be in service to humanity, in service to communion?
That in the beginning of this movement from we're in service to the machines using protocols, which at the end of the day only really even think about the notion of how do machines communicate and what happens with them is not even part of the story, to no, humans. And machines are over here helping out to the degree to which that is useful. And sometimes not much at all, although this is helpful, right? This machine is actually servicing our relationship in a very nice way.
Yeah. No, this machine allows me to connect with thousands of people at this point from all walks of life.
Yeah, schlepping my carcass across the country by walking is not going to get much done.
No.
Yeah. Interesting thing that popped in my head though about that, and it's not necessarily a critique or anything, but it's just kind of an expansion. Is when machines talk to each other, like say like technologically, like whether they're AIs or just programs or whatever, they communicate before relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're not relating to each other;
They're
they're communicating with each other. So there's something fundamentally lacking with technology to technology communication, but it can be useful.
Well, sure, it can be useful. Yeah.
Like
in
say,
the short term.
Well, if humans interface, and we are interfaced with technology, building relationships through something that communicates with somebody else, like, 'cause like everybody who watches, say like this video or follows these people without even communicating with each other or building a relationship.
Right.
If that makes
Right.
any sense.
So how do we get the technology that we're using, such as the internet, to be in service of communion? It actually does have to begin before the technology is communicating. It's got to come from us individually. We have to be in that caring mode of something, of willfully being subservient to something greater than ourselves. That is a transcendent way of being.
Well, it comes down to our relationship with our technology now, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Is your phone the master, or are you the master that uses the phone? On your social media, there's a lot of people that make good money and are able to support themselves just through social media. But then there's others who are just passive consumers of it, and it's not making them anything. It's actually harming them in the long run. So the direction of relationship is wrong in that case.
Well, it's like Vervaeke, when he talked about AI on this one podcast I saw him speaking on one day. He referred to how we're developing super intelligent machines that are going to be incredibly foolish.
Yeah.
They'd have no wisdom because there is no communion or deep relationship prior to that intelligence. And intelligence is an incredibly powerful tool that we have access to as humans, but without the wisdom to wield it, oh boy. So
yeah,
jumping ahead a little bit
we need a wisdom
here.
AI.
So mammon versus the good. This is interesting.
The degree to which money is afforded to becoming an idol is obviously very high. And so we need to judge it, but part of that judging is not to accuse it as such, but actually properly say, hey, you don't actually get to be God, right? Sorry, mammon, no. Right? Sorry, no. This is a tool. All of God's creation is created for the good. There's a way that it moves over here, and that way is very bad. Fine. But there's a way over here. What's that look like? I'm going to take that as the question.
Okay.
And obviously money is a tool for facilitating certain kinds of relationship that produce the value of collaboration at a scale of human relationship that is much, much, much larger than is available inside deep, intimate relationality. Okay, that's what it is. That's what it does.
So it's shallow but broad.
Yeah, shallow but broad. And we often do in our cultures these days treat money as God, as like the highest ultimate thing that is to be focused on. So money becomes mammon. And money is a useful tool, but it only allows us a shallow relationality across a very broad spectrum. You can encompass hundreds of millions of people, but it's not a deep relationship. It's just a tool that works on a shallow level to help us to create commerce and so on.
Yeah, and like
it's easier than
it's easier than carrying around 20 chickens if you want to pay for something. But it doesn't replace the actual 20 chickens, or it doesn't replace value. It is just a stand-in for a type of value. What is value? Well, value is a quality of, like, say, importance. Something that is more valuable has more importance. And that whatever royal gemstone ring that's worth $50 million, like, as far as its materials and stuff like that and its usefulness, is not very useful, but it's highly valuable. So where's that value come from? Well, it's a quality of best word, lacking on the words here today. Well, anyway, it's a quality that can just be assigned,
right.
That ring.
It's useful, but if we allow the shallowness of this tool that is money to govern us, then it corrupts our relationships. We need a depth of relationship, appreciation, communion, deep love for one another prior to the use of something like money. That's why it was really useful for us to take Sundays off from commerce. The market is closed. You just be with your family, be with your loved ones, be with your community, and let's be in a state of reverence for an ultimate ideal of goodness that transcends any one of us, that none of us will ever achieve, but we always have room to grow towards. I love that there is this infinite room for growth in transcendent ideals. None of us are ever going to be as good as Christ, but the example Christ left us is an ultimate good that we can always improve towards. What a thing. So let's see what Jordan Benjamin have to say on this.
So the challenge is that when we find ourselves seduced, usually unconsciously, and then over time increasingly consciously, and I'll just use the archetype, into the service of mammon, meaning we allow shallowness to govern deep depth. Well, okay, then we're on a trajectory, and that trajectory has a series of stages, but an endpoint that is very bad. By the way, the endpoint is collapse, FYI.
Yeah.
It actually is collapse, because once the depth has been fully corrupted, like once the depth has been hollowed out, shallowness is not strong enough to hold anything.
Yeah.
Okay, so but if we're able to find a way to orient towards depth and have depth be the center, and depth has a way of constraining this tendency to drift over there, then great.
Great. Yes, because we have allowed for a shallowness to kind of take over, and we've lost our sense of the sacred. You know, we have all disconnected from the religious upbringing that was here prior to us, and we're searching oftentimes for something new, or we're just totally turned off and closed off from perhaps juvenile notions of religion, like you were saying earlier, sky god, this and that.
Sky daddy.
Yeah, sky daddy, right.
But yeah, so when it comes to say depth and shallowness, a wide but shallow pool will get muddy and funky and will go stagnant and get corrupted much quicker than a very deep well. And on the surface, you just look and you're like, well, as well, it's only 2 feet across. How much water could it really have in there, and how could it be, could it be pure, but turns out it is, because it's very deep and there's a lot of it. Whereas that that very shallow pond that you see, it's like, look at all this water on the surface here, it's like 100 feet across. Well, that's going to go stagnant way before the well does, but we seem to look at that and go, yeah, that's where I want to get my water. And in the analogy, the water would be your sense of understanding of yourself in the universe, a sense of contentment that we all seem to be going towards, insert whatever we're really truly trying to get at. And it's not just money. There's a lot of things that we can, I would have to say experience is probably one of those things too. We've got this consumption mechanism in us that wants to
experience,
and just consume experience, but experience without time to reflect. And garner wisdom from it is just about as valuable as that dirty puddle of water that's very shallow that we keep returning to, or like the mammon as well. Say like lust. You want to get that experience. You want to feel that bliss and that greatness and everything. You keep going for that experience, but is there really anything in it?
No, without really a deep, abiding relationship behind it, it's quite shallow. It's not ultimately.
Yeah, and actually, will leave you dried out and. Kind of
There's got to be a deeper reason.
Yeah,
guys, jumping back over now, we're going to look at how culture can support and nurture us over time. And so what is it that can unite disparate and very different, distant cultures? And we've tried different things, such as liberalism. When religion started to have rifts in Europe, liberalism came around as a solution, a patch, as Jordan puts it, to create a simulacrum of relationship. So this is really, really intriguing. So here we go, jumping on over.
It supports and nurtures us over time, over time in a generation. and is productive and all those things. That's what we want out of a culture. What we need then is some way for me and those people over there to have some quality of relationship, which is itself healthy. Right? What happened with liberalism is that liberalism was like, shit, even Christians can't get along. Right? I think Hobbes is as simple as Hobbes. Man, the Protestants and the Catholics, like Christendom broke. Christendom was the thing that held it all together, right? At the end of the day, we had the whole Middle Ages, and all these Europeans are all crazy and very different and fighting with each other. And Christian was like, yeah, but we're all kind of on the same team, right? Don't go too far.
Yeah, don't go too far. Don't go too far. But when that broke down, we were kind of left reeling. So we substituted, you know, this new system of liberalism in place, which was a useful patch for a time. And Jordan speaks on that in this next clip here.
And, it wasn't completely, it wasn't a completely corrupted puddle or a completely viable puddle either. It was water when water was needed. May not have been the best water, but it was needed. At this time, like, let's not forget why the Protestant Reformation happened. Is the church, the Catholic Church at the time, got too big for its britches.
Yep.
And not just like, size of like how much, like land mass or whatever, but like what its purpose was in this world. It wanted to be, not just the leader in the church to help get to Jesus and all that, but it wanted to rule in the world. It got too worldly, if you will, and it had its secret police going after people that were dissidents and naysayers. And I'm sorry, but if your religion can't handle a little bit of dissidents and naysayers, then you don't have much of a religion, do you now? And that was kind of what happened with the Protestant Reformation. And then, move on, go forward. A lot of thinkers came out of this that were now allowed to think without having to be persecuted by the church, because now there's this idea of, well, there's a non-church area in community and a church area, and if we can keep them separate, we can keep the church from getting too big. But then what it ended up happening is that secular separate end got too big for its own britches, and then wanted to basically try to do what the church does, is, or, the intermediary between man and God, or whatever. It started trying to do that, and then you get these really perverse ideologies that starts stemming out of that.
Yes,
but
yes,
still,
that's exactly
but they
what
were
happened.
still trying to answer the same questions that we're trying to answer through religion or through different spiritual practices. But it, I guess, lost the mooring of an ancient tradition that has been tried and true for all of humanity, and that's roughly religion, or as Vervaeke says, what is it, religios? What religion? Religio, what religion does without the dogma, basically.
So the church was failing at upholding the transcendent ideals put forth in that religious structure, and it started to bifurcate. And then liberalism comes along as a patch, and I like how you put that as like, it might not be clean water, maybe it's just dirty water, but it's keeping us alive. And so we try these things out as a species, and wisdom is learning from our mistakes. There's no growing forward without making mistakes as a human and as a species. So it's not that we have to beat ourselves up. We're here in the midst of a story, and we're writing this story together about how to be in the world. And we have room to continually improve at that. So it's okay. We're going to make mistakes along the way. We just have to make sure that they are not existential. And
Jordan Peterson,
that's where the care comes in, right?
Jordan Peterson said something that really stuck with me. He was talking at I think a Catholic college or something like that. But it was, you don't go from tyranny into the promised land. You go from tyranny into the freaking desert. And that's very much, you could say, what liberalism was dealing with. It was going from tyranny, and hoping for the promised land, but landing squarely in the desert with the snakes that are coming after you to bite at your
Becoming
heels.
tyrannical itself.
And well, and just tough. It wasn't this fix all thing that I think a lot of people really make liberalism out to be. Like, it still has its issues. Yes, it helps with certain things, but it's the desert. You need to run. You need to get away from the tyranny. Okay, you're not.
So it's not an either or then, right? It's not just liberalism, and it's not just religion. It's something deeper that holds both. It's that sense of the sacred that calls to us as humans, that inspires us to create religious structures in the first place. This all of these world's religions is all just humans pointing at this ineffable source from which we all spring that is incomprehensible and forever ineffable, forever beyond our comprehension and total understanding. And, we're doing our best to form a relationship with that. And we're doing the best we can as we go through this here. So this is not even to put blame on anybody. What the liberal world order has brought the world is it's brought the majority of the planet out of poverty, but this was a temporary patch that was not going to be able to last forever. Now we see it descending into tyranny because it's all about what benefits me and benefits you too, that we can work. But it's it's appealing to our greed and our self-interest rather than something that transcends all of us, that we all get to be a part of.
Yeah.
So how do we create, how do we allow for and share in that sense of the sacred together in fellowship, even though we come from so many different disparate cultures? How can we recognize, and appreciate that this is all that we've been trying to do all this time is realize a relationship with ineffable. And none of our religions are ever going to be perfect expressions of that relationship with the ineffable. They're all just fingers pointing at the moon.
Well, and frankly, also, if you've read the Bible, like the Old Testament was just, the Jews messing up over and over again. They get something right, and then they mess up.
Right,
and then they're corrected. And then they get it right, and then they mess up, and then they're corrected. And, that's
There's the
just
process.
That's just the process.
That's it.
I think one of the hitches in our giddy up as a species in the time of liberalism is the idea of just getting rid of suffering, this removal of suffering. It's like, well, that's not really a good idea because of what suffering does. Now, undo suffering, get medications out, to the world as best you can, so you're not dying from a hangnail, or if you got a real bad skin disorder, you can do I'm not talking about that, but the true deep suffering that from you going through it, you can gain wisdom through that suffering. We need to realize is important, and we must hold on to, and not let anybody tell us, oh, well, it's just better to get rid of it. It's not. It's not. Because where do you get you don't get wisdom from good times.
No, you don't. You really don't. All right, guys. So jumping forward now, this is going to be a clip on liberalism as a metaculture that we kind of put in place as a patch.
Yeah. But then Christendom, right? Christendom broke twice, right? You had the first break, the Great Schism. You had the second break. The second break was more intimate because on the other side of a line.
Yeah.
The line was already a pretty big line. Like, wow, shit, liberalism's like, fuck, that was bad news. And it was, right? It's seriously bad news. When the field of coherence that is held together by something breaks into two distinct identities that are now intrinsically in conflict, yikes. And so liberalism's like, we got to solve that problem. We now need to create, and here's the word I'm going to use, we need to create a metaculture. It's a culture, right? It's the same fabric as culture. It's a paradigm.
Yeah.
It's designed in such a way that it has the ability to span over a large group of people and creates a subordination of their particularity, but in the name of peace and in the name of ultimately then mutual wealth.
Okay.
Peace and wealth. Remember Hobbes, right? It's nasty, beautiful, and short out there. We need a Leviathan to keep us from killing each other.
Okay. So that's where liberalism, the liberal world order, comes in. And we tried to patch that in to replace the religious substructure that had kind of kept us from killing each other off. But liberalism, indeed, itself becomes tyranny and relies upon a forced rule of law when a people don't have a sense of a transcendent good that we all recognize that we're reaching towards here together. But it was something that held us together for a little bit, these disparate cultures that don't have any points of relation. Well, hey, here's a way that we can at least kind of get along.
Well, and particularly in Europe, there's this idea that all Europeans are the same, and they're not. And they, all of European history is just filled with different factions fighting each other for dominance over a relatively small area, but very rich in resource and very easy to travel as far as the place, way easier to travel than say like Africa or, a lot of parts of Asia. But there's a lot of peace. We want peace. Well, if you lock everybody into a small little cell, and you don't ever let them out, there will be no violence. There will be peace. But what kind of world is that? And I know that that's really really reductive, but
Yeah, but just
it's
watch an
still
episode of Black Mirror where
yeah,
everybody's in their little cell and they've got these high digital screen walls in every direction
yeah.
and they're just constantly distracted. They're in a prison of entertainment. And it's peaceful, I guess, but it's super shallow and not fulfilling.
Well, and really, what say what I think would be a good example of a healthy merger of this liberalism, metaculture, and cultural religiosity would be, yes, the goal is peace, but it's peace within yourself. So you can control yourself when you're out with other people and out in the actual culture and mitigate as much, suffering and violence, because there's always going to be suffering and violence no matter how you cut it. We're organisms, that's what we do. But if you can become at peace in yourself and get more and more people to take that idea of peace instead of this outward worldly thing, but a very personal thing.
I like that. So we come to peace within ourselves. We do so in a relationship with others
Mm.
while we're doing that as well.
And
So we have a supportive community that
and
we are in communion with
yeah, and
in
also
pursuit of this mission together.
and also in relationship with something akin to God.
Exactly. A
Whether you
transcendent
believe
ideal.
in, Sky Daddy or any kind of God
Source,
or not,
all,
but
oneness, whatever you want to
yeah.
call it. Yeah.
So that the merger of liberalism and religion, which is very, I would say, very dangerous to try to attempt, but still needs to be done because we're not going to get rid of liberalism, nor do I think we should. I just think it's the well needs to be dug deeper because the pond is drying up.
Yeah, we need to be tapping into the religio rather than just merely organized religion to pull this off. Because we've got to, and I think Martin Luther King alluded to this in his Beyond Vietnam speech when he was speaking to church leaders across the nation and trying to build up a pro-peace movement to end the Vietnam War. He spoke on how all the great religions have seen love as the supreme unifying principle of life, and it's those points of shared recognition that I think we can build on top of. So all of our variant cultures, with all their very different religious systems, we recognize the shared roots that seem to be recognized cross-culturally, and there we find transcendent ideals that are beyond any one culture that all share appreciation of. Then we have something to build on.
Well, perhaps that quest is the desert. We're moving from tyranny into the desert, looking for the promised land, and that desert is the hard work that it is going to, fleshing out. And I don't mean fleshing out as in building, but fleshing out, like
Flushing up.
yeah, like the commonalities between all things. And it's going to be traumatic too, because yes, there are practices in almost every religion, but some other, some religions have worse ones than others that will have to be like, well, if we want to make this happen, no, we can't do that.
Well, this is where we have to be able to have dialogues on a mass scale cross-culturally, and thank God that we have the internet now to do that. And so now we're recognizing that there's an intentionality, an orientation, a way of being that we can utilize these technologies such as the internet, mass communication tools through. And so coming from that highest way of being that we can humble ourselves in service of, that seems to be the way to wield these tools more responsibly, more wisely, and gaining that generational knowledge that we have lost. So getting back in touch with our elders, I think is incredibly important, and understanding the errors of our past from a compassionate perspective, but transcending the blame of others and recognizing where we can all fall victim to these tendencies. Any one of us could have been a Nazi guard. We think that we wouldn't have been, or we think that we wouldn't have ratted on our Jewish neighbors or this or that in that circumstance. But
yeah, but the
when the fear of death and torture is upon you, watch how quickly one can change their tune.
Well, and actually, so Jordan Peterson brought up like one good way to tell if that fact that you wouldn't have been is, have you ever actually stood up to speak out against something that is very popular and it's very dangerous for you to speak out against it? So like, like way back, like back in the day, 60 years ago or whatever, saying that, well, homosexuals are people too, or even before the, black, slaves were people too. But now that has become, well, yeah, it's normal. That's the popular thing. Now the thing that you speak out against is like, well, the mutilation of our children and the overstepping of our government on people's rights, and not being trusting of the established information avenues as well. That those are the unpopular things that will get you canceled. Will get your, even people you think that are close friends, you will see the demon pop out of them and come after you. And if you can actually do that and do it with a good conscience, that's a pretty good mark that you may not have actually become a
lost to an
Auschwitz guard, kind of thing.
Yeah, right.
Because it's like, well, ultimately at the end of the day, to speak up against the political sociological norm is death, whether it's physical death or death of you within the community.
It's hard to love those with whom we disagree, but that's the only way to get out of these partisan traps we find ourselves in. Everyone's got to be a part of a gang nowadays. Everyone's left or right or this or that, and we love to label ourselves nowadays. Are we willing to try and understand the value orientations of those with whom we disagree so we can understand where they're actually come from? We have to be able to do that, I think, in order to be able to see that there might be some reason and logic behind their way of seeing the world. And, without that willingness, we are going to be easily lost and easily channeled into this various different tribal orientations, which are very closed off from everything around them. It's a tough process, but it takes courage.
Oh, this is that is the desert. That path is the desert. Not going to feel good.
You got to be willing, to go out on a limb and say things that are unpopular. The only way to find the truth, of course, is to be able to get out of the tribal viewpoints and kind of get a view above of the map and look at how everybody is seeing things and what is the information they're looking at, what's the information these guys are looking at. Let's find that truth that's somewhere in the middle.
And you can train yourself to do this. This is what like classes in critical thinking skills do. They teach you how to think about what you're thinking and how you're thinking, which when I won't say I'm like the greatest at it or anything, but the more I get in the practice of doing it, the more it just comes second nature. When I see something that really pisses me off, I notice that, like that pissed me off and I had an emotive response to it that made me think a certain way. Yeah. But then by thinking that, really, am I any better than this, cause I'm trying to fight against?
There's the humility and the surrender.
Yeah. And to what degree, or to what degree am I right in feeling that pissed offness, but then to what degree am I actually wrong for thinking that? And then how can I, so you get,
and
you
not
get
just
used
wrong.
to thinking
it's like
about
figuring out, can I have compassion for those with whom I disagree? Can I really try and understand from a heartful place where they're coming from and why they believe this? What points do they have that are actually useful? Because it's just going to come down to a disagreement of how we resolve this situation. Like, what do we do about this is really what we're all disagreeing on all the time.
Yeah, well, the biggest difference, disagreement we've had in human history is just, how do we move forward? Well, no, we go this way. It's it's the split fork in the road, symbol. Like it's just.
And there's actually a third way here that we're looking at, and that's what we're offering.
And a fourth, and a fifth, and a sixth, and a seventh, an infinite amount of ways. But yet again,
something that transcends the dichotomy, though, the polarizing process that we find ourselves continually being trapped in, where we get lost into one or the other side of a pitched battle. And then, of course, the greedy and the powerful manipulators among us can utilize their divide and conquer methodology to further inflame and increase those divides and turn us against each other and we further amass power.
We do a good enough job personally ourselves with that, and
we do.
People doing it to us. We'll bite at the chance to be like, no, my tribe. For you,
right?
My team. Your team sucks because your team's your team and my team's my team.
So, is there any way that we can come up with together that doesn't end with us killing each other, as what happens when liberalism fails? Go.
Liberals that I deeply respect, Helen Pluckrose by name, just constantly tries to constrain liberalism to a protocol of disagreement, of hashing out disagreement.
This exactly.
Protocol. It's the most reasonable thing on the block.
How do we not have killing each other be the base state? Right? The way we resolve disputes. We got disputes, we got to resolve them. Is there any way we can not kill each other?
Yeah.
Neat.
And And at the same time, science comes along. I was just talking about this yesterday. At the same time that liberalism's formed, all these ideologies start forming because the technocratic mind starts to produce all these different models.
Yeah.
And the foundation of everything is then reason and reasonability or rationality, which is technology. We're trying to solve. It's all a puzzle, right? And that way of relating doesn't have heart.
No, it doesn't have heart. So the technocratic mind, so as technology started to increase, or our capacity started to increase due to technological advancement, we became increasingly reliant on technology and started to even see technology as a form of truth because it gives us so much power. Like an atom bomb is a real thing. It produces an enormous impact. And so we started to rely on technology to form models, and we're creating shallow solutions.
Yeah, and
So
yeah, and well,
Yeah.
like say like the camera came and you like George Floyd's a good example, and it's very touchy, and I don't mean to bring it up to be touchy, but it's a good example of like, well, we saw the knee on the neck, right? You saw that little bit, but the whole truth of it was long before that and after that, when he was in the car and screaming out, "Get me on the ground," and then the ball of drugs that he ate and all this other stuff. And if you didn't see that, you would assume just the knee on the neck is what took him out. But then so it's I guess technology allows us to be lazy. Well, I just saw it, and or the news told me it, or um
Yeah, what's he actually ODing? Was a
yeah,
valid question at that time?
and that happens all the time too. If you look at like war coverage and stuff like that, if you want to get a well-rounded look at what anything that's going on, you can use technology, but you have to really dig and keep digging and keep going and actually use the tool, not
Yeah.
have the tool use you.
Yeah.
Because right now the way it is you just
Yeah,
turn it
there's-
on, you go, oh,
There's so much
somebody
more
said
nuance.
this, it must be
Yeah.
true because it's an official source. Or,
Yeah,
yeah.
so much. There's so much nuance there because he could very well have been ODing because he took a speedball, and so he had heroin and methamphetamines in the system at the same time,
Fentanyl and
or
meth.
fentanyl and meth. Yeah, and then he, but then also perhaps the aggressiveness of the police exacerbated the situation. Just to be fair, there's a lot of
And
nuance. to
perhaps
this,
they should have had medics come and hit him with the Narcan.
Mm-hmm,
Because that is common practice. Like I saw something that's like they're injecting people with sedatives and stuff. It's like,
So-
well, actually, that's when you see the
Right.
EMT come up and they hit him with that.
So-
That's the Narcan.
So now here we're looking for a solution that is fair and good to one and all,
Yeah.
rather than arguing over whose version of the events is correct. We're trying to figure it out together, and that's the orientation that we have to take together as a species. We can't just keep debating against each other in this oppositional
well, who
style
are your
of relation.
sources? You're stupid.
We have to be side by side figuring this thing out together. So when you're having a really intense, say, political dispute with somebody, change the way that you're framing the conversation, your questions and your statements, and say, well, what if? And literally, even in the situation, try and position yourself. Sometimes this helps, at least within your mind, figuratively, as being side by side with the person, trying to figure it out. Start framing things that way and get them involved in figuring it out with you, and be humble. This is where we are surrendering ourselves to something greater once again. This is so key because we are in such a destabilized, intensely divisive time, and it's only ramping up the more that we play into and feed into it. And then there, of course, are powers overseas using information warfare, psychological manipulation techniques to further inflame. There's whole bot farms coming out of Russia and China that will find a hot point issue in America, and then thousands of bots at the same time start talking about this on Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and Instagram and everywhere else. And we think it's real people. And so they're making these arguments just blow up and explode into huge societal emergencies by inflaming them, because it's divide and conquer methodology once again, and corporatists are using this within our own country against us as well.
But we're not without our own toolkit. We have definitions of a lot of the logical fallacies, and say the best way to resist the bot farm is to understand the logical fallacy of just because it is known fallacy. Just because everybody believes it is true doesn't make it true. We all used to believe that the planet was flat. That didn't make it true. It took people to like make very subtle observations and then, you know, and then seeing like, oh, well, I've got an issue with how I'm building this or my math. There must be something more because of the, you know, yeah, it should work on this flat, but it's not quite working. And then have an inspiration. Oh, what if I then my well, nobody's gonna believe me.
Believe nothing just because it's popular. Buddha gave this great advice, and it basically means question everything. Believe nothing, even if many people believe it and say it is true. Believe nothing, even if your elders or teachers say it is true. Your parents, your friends say it is true. Believe nothing, even if I, as Buddha, say is true. Only after your own careful investigation and observation, finding it to be true and good for one and all, then accept it and live up to it. So,
and that's an active process too, you know, because then you have to start doing it, and if it works, it works, and if it doesn't, it doesn't, and then you have to be humble enough to be like, okay, well, yeah, that may have been a waste of time, but it's worth starting over.
Yeah,
and doing it better. This, you know, trying to figure out how to do it better always. And I guess that's the issue with religion, any theory, you know, whether it's liberalism or any of those things. If they stick around too long without adapting, and I don't mean like, you know, say with religion, like complete overhauls, but adapting with as humans are adapting, it ossifies, it becomes corrupted, and it will fight tooth and nail to keep its position. You know, it's just the nature of the universe. The old fights with the new. I would prefer a dance, you know, stepping back into the old to then move forward.
A reciprocal relation.
Yeah, but there is this pull between the old and the new that's just always going to be there because, well, as far as I can tell, because it has always been there.
That's right. Yeah, and that's why we need that generational relationship and conversation to be ongoing. So let's jump ahead here to our next sequence.
So you have like these, and Vervaeke does this great, even though he's not a romantic. He really dislikes the romantics. I still don't understand why, but the romantic reaction to that, it's like, no, there's something more. There's
I can explain why. The reason is because the romantics are disconnected. You take a whole and you separate it into two parts. Both parts are wrong. They need to be into a whole. But the romantic sentiment, the thing that romantics emerge to try to preserve, that piece is critical and lovely. But so is this, right? They're both lovely. We just need to be part of a well-integrated whole. This goes back to judgment. And this goes back to communion, right? There's a thing that happens where we try to take two parts and either have them be separate in some kind of mediated relationship, or we try to smoosh them back together analytically. And that's ideology, right? Ideology says, no. I can smoosh them back together and I've got a structure to hold them in place, man. That's not health, right? That's not healing. That's not integration. That's not wholeness. That's not wisdom. That's something else. And that's kind of buying time.
That's just buying us time. That's right. So that's what liberalism has been doing so far. It's been a patch, but it hasn't been a cure.
Well, and sometimes you need to buy time, like the tourniquet. You know, when somebody gets really badly hurt, you got to put the tourniquet on, but you can only really keep it on there from like a half an hour to an hour before whatever's downstream from that completely starts rotting away. It's just giving you time. The question is I guess, like, how much time left do we have within, you know, say like liberalism? How much time? Because it can't keep going the way it's going, because obviously it's not working optimally.
Yeah, and Jordan speaks on that now as this conversation continues. So countdown to catastrophe situation we find ourselves in.
That's kind of the thing. This is what happens, is that it has two vectors to it. One is liberalism has a clock. You start liberalism, click, you're on a countdown to catastrophe. But for a while, it works. It works okay for a while. And here's the other thing. Because you can get a whole bunch of people who are quite distinct from each other into a peaceful relationship, it also produces wealth. And so you don't have war, or much less war. It's not as catastrophic, although ideology.
Once you get through the world wars.
Well, that's the point. The world wars happen as a degenerate intrinsic of liberalism. It's not an error. It's part of what happens. It's how it works. Because this patch doesn't bring communion, right? It brings something that is a simulacrum of communion. And in that simulacrum, it has a variety of error conditions, because it's built on not bringing people into actual relationship of wholeness. It's bringing people into a minimum viable connection where they don't kill each other.
A minimal viable connection where we don't kill each other.
Yeah,
that's really what.
Well, and that's no place to just stay.
Yes.
That's the bare basics of well, any type of community or civilization is getting together long enough not to kill each other. But that doesn't mean you just stop there. And worship that as the ultimate good. You know, there's a whole lot more to flourishing of humanity than just not killing each other. You know.
Right. Yeah. So what's the counter then? What's the counteractive process to the clock ticking down here? How do we get it to? How do we start giving ourselves time again?
But before we go on, there was another, like, well, let's say sub patch after the World Wars. It was the introduction of the what is it? The economic
Trade
economic liberal order, basically,
Okay.
which was
trade agreements.
yeah, well, instead of fighting war, like main wars between countries and boots on the ground and lines and all that stuff, and going, that is, we fight in proxy countries and we try to bankrupt each other. Not a really great idea. And I guess there was some good
atom bombs for the last half century. Since
yeah, but you know,
them.
we've killed a lot of people that didn't really need to be dying, and it wasn't their cause. You know, whether they're fighting or not, whether they're collateral or people going in. It's like, you know, why the hell were we in the Middle East not once but twice?
Well, yeah. What did 500,000 Iraqi children starving to death have to do with 9/11?
Yeah, right.
Absolutely not.
Well, we didn't go after the Saudis, and we know that they were directly involved.
Yep.
Oh, because, well, they scratch our back and we scratch theirs.
Well, that's right. The hijackers were from all allied nations.
Yeah. Yeah, crazy. Yeah, but that's I'm not going to go down
That's
that
a whole other rabbit
yeah,
hole.
yeah.
Old Tim Osman, who Osama bin Laden, who was a CIA asset and used to live in Alexandria, Virginia for a time. That's a whole other rabbit hole. But we might get into that someday. So, what is the counter?
I love it. What's the counter then? I mean, we're in this post-liberal environment. The liberals, I see, it's really fascinating because I love them so much because I am of them. Like, that's my culture, you know, even though I'm like on the edges of it, trying to figure out and seeing the catastrophes. But like, I can be reasonable and I can relate to anybody and I can be open to anybody and really try to use the liberal protocol to make real connection, you know, because the liberal protocol is very good for what it does. Or not even the protocol, but just the attitude or affect of it. Reasonable, polite, etc.
Because it has helped us, like you were saying before. It has been a patch. It has been some way of stopping the bleeding.
Yeah, well,
but it hasn't been perfect at that by any means.
A communal societal expectation of baseline politeness and relative physical peace with punishment if you go outside of that, whether it's like, you know, if you're rude. People are just not going to want to deal with you.
Well, that's
so
where the tyranny can come in.
Yeah,
that tool of using only punishment rather than instilling wisdom in the people.
Yeah,
can become tyrannical.
So, you know, like, yeah, we can stop a fair bit of violence by developing, you know, high trust communities and societies, but high trust societies and communities can go downhill really fast into low trust societies if we're not very careful at maintaining not the bare minimum, but maintaining the optimal flow of power, if you will. Because power has to go all ways. It has to go up, it has to go down, it has to go forward and backward in all ways. But there's an optimal rate of movement through that. I do think that liberalism has done an okay job at, like, keeping the bare minimum. It's not quite optimal, but, you know, we can have a pleasant, you know, we're just pleasant enough with each other that we don't want to wring each other's freaking necks.
It's a sock filter that's helping us get the spaceship to land safely back on the ground, but you can't use that flight after flight after flight.
Yeah.
So, jumping ahead, getting down to the last few clips here, guys.
It's like, it's not gonna, you said, it's like there's the ticking, it's ticking. So what else is it? Me and my wife get in this argument a lot because she's like, this is, God wants us to relate in the way that liberalism, like real liberalism is. I'm like, yeah, I know, but.
Oh no, he doesn't. Right.
Okay.
God wants to be, right. And the way I've actually thought about it is it's like, we can have like 3 stages or 3 pieces on a continuum. We typically think about it as 2. So over here, I'm going to have society. And society is relationships entirely mediated by formalisms. You know, I go to Starbucks, I give the barista whatever it is, $10. The barista gives me a coffee and misspells my name. Right? That's society. I don't know the barista. The barista doesn't know me. The barista doesn't want to know me. Right? There's nothing about relationship involved in this. It's functional. It's a machine. It produces stuff. This is what money at its worst does, right? It enables everything to narrow down to the, I'm not actually building friendship or connection, but I'm getting a coffee.
Yeah, very shallow relationality.
So that's society.
That's society as it currently stands. But perhaps God, the source of us all, whatever one wishes to call it, wants communion with us, wants us to co-create along with it, wants us to surrender to something greater than our personal preferences and beliefs.
Well, and ultimately, you know, the communion would be integrated relationship. Everybody coming together in an organized, integrated relationship.
At the very least, even if we don't say God's source, a transcendent
ideal.
Yeah.
Because, you know, this idea of society where it's like, well, you know, you don't know your cops anymore. You don't know the person who makes your food when you go to the store. You don't know, well, I'd say the person who pumps your gas, but most states you just pump your own gas. There you go. You don't have that anymore. You barely know your pastor.
Yeah. So this very shallow relationality. Yeah. With that, so community that is not grounded in. It's not very deep.
It's relationship without relation. I know that sounds weird and kind of stupid, but like, well, yeah, my relationship with this person only extends as far as they give me my drink when I go to the store.
Yeah, relating without relationship.
Yeah, it's just, and that's just job position. Oh, the barista, opposed to Stephanie, the barista, who always makes sure to give me a little bit extra this because she knows, and you know, like I've known her dad forever. We went to high school with each other. You know,
that changes the game
like,
entirely.
There you go. You know, the
totally different experience.
Deep relationship opposed to
she knows you know her, you care about her, you understand her family, you're integrated, and you're together. So.
And I think that's probably the argument against the like the large tent idea. Like, you know, you hear like large tent conservatism and stuff like that. But the argument against it is when the tent gets too large, you're not actually able to have relationships with people.
Right.
If there's nothing that really keeps you together other than the superficial large tent.
Yep.
There has to be something more that helps you identify and co-identify with each other.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, if the number gets too large, you know, you had a 1,000-person church, you're not getting to know those people as well as if it were a 100-person church by any means.
And while
so you can't get into a communal relationship on that level. You can't sympathize with them in a way that you're truly feeling what they're feeling.
Well, and then you get factions within one church. And I don't mean church like one sect of, but within the one building, there's now factions within there because there's only so many people that you can have a good, strong relationship with, or even enough of a relationship to give a shit about them.
Right.
And then, well, it's like, okay, well, we're left pewers and you're right pewers, and we're the ones who sit in the front and you're the ones who sit in the back, and we're the
ones that vote for that guy. We're the ones that vote for this guy.
And then what do you have? You don't have anything. Now, yet again, okay, you have this church society, but it's just not very deep, and well, it was broad, but now it's drying up and cracking into pieces, and there you go.
All righty. So, continuing on now.
Then this other thing that we all yearn for is community. Right? Community. Oh, I do know the barista. The barista knows me. I actually know the barista's kids. They go to the same school that my kids go to. Yep. I care about the barista's kids. That's really important. I actually want the barista to actually do well because the barista is actually the owner of the coffee shop. So, you know, that's community. Okay. Now, what we do is we yearn for community. But what I want to do is I want to expand the continuum and put community in the middle. And over here is communion.
Okay.
The difference between community and communion is the communion is grounded in a deeper reality that is intrinsically whole.
Yeah.
Right. And community is a derivative of communion, or it is feedstock for society. As soon as community is not grounded in communion, it becomes society in a finite time. Like the entropic powers of all the different powers and principalities will corrode it at the edges. Your kid leaves your community to go to college and gets a big job in the city because choices are no longer being made by a wholeness of value, but are rather being made by a narrowness of value. Right? That's
Shallow.
evaporation. Right?
There is.
Community will break. Somebody comes in and replaces the coffee shop with a Starbucks. Why? Well, because you can make more money with the Starbucks or whatever. Fills in the blank. The value constructs are no longer being governed by something which is stewarding things from the point of view of an actual wholeness, but are increasingly governed by parts that are trying to be coordinated by some kind of protocol or construct, and that doesn't work. Right? That drifts over here. And it's an inevitable drift at some point. It may take a while, depending. Communion is grounded in something which is eternal and intrinsically whole, which makes it, of course, strong enough to resist this by nature.
And that can exist without the concept of God, a Godhead of some type too. It in and of itself, communion is intrinsically whole by its very nature. Now, mind you, I still think that there is a divine creator. However you want to look at it is your business. I tend to look at it the way I do, but I don't necessarily think I think atheists who don't believe in a God can still have communion with their fellow man, and it not just be community that then, like he said, gets broken up into like feedstock for society.
Because in place of communion, we get society, which is a very shallow set of relationships. That don't give us any deep-rooted sense of comprehension or understanding and appreciation of one another. So, and maybe perhaps rather than atheist, which is a certainty that there is nothing, in an agnostic stance where one is open and not certain, is a more realistic groundwork.
I think atheists, if they practice these things, inevitably end up going into agnosticism and then more of a, what do you call it, like a culturally Christian or culturally, religious.
Yeah,
but
if you're
not
consistently
actually
atheistic,
that. But
it becomes nihilism.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing. So if you're not building a healthy relationship with yourself and others, and you're an atheist, you will become nihilistic, and then it would be your goal to kill God.
Yeah, because the only thing that fulfills
sees you kill him,
that gives you any sense of fulfillment, albeit temporary, artificial fulfillment, is materialism. And then as materialism fails, you start to hate the world and hate oneself and hate everyone else, and I'm very nihilistic.
Well, yeah, because you're not getting the things that actually nurture you, and then you become bitter and resentful, and
blameful.
No wonder this nihilistic edge causes people to go mad and control people and commit mass genocide and stuff. No wonder.
There's no self-responsibility.
Well, and there's a very deep self-hatred as well,
Yes.
like that maybe you don't want to admit. Like, you think Hitler loved himself? Nah, maybe he thought he did, but I guarantee you, in the core of himself, he hated himself. Same as Stalin, same as Lenin, same as Marx, same as all of these, very. Right. I don't want to say atheistic, but nihilistic, because I don't know necessarily if.
I think we can throw Dick Cheney into that mix.
Yeah, well, and frankly, he was pretty brutalized as well, and I'm sure coming back from that and maybe not having a good, strong
sense of morality.
And community to help rebuild yourself within can make you pretty evil. Like, well, okay, you come back from war and being tortured and all that stuff, and then you get into politics. That's not a good community of people for becoming a better, happier person.
Cheney wasn't in war. McCain was.
McCain, excuse me. I know.
That guy was actually a half decent human being. I'm talking about
Cheney.
Oh
yeah, Cheney.
Which is a whole other story.
Yeah, not McCain.
Yeah. So how can technology be in service to communion? Find out.
How does communion arrive on the internet? How does technology become in service to communion?
Yeah, that's the second way you said it is better. So it definitely doesn't arrive by means of the internet. Communion arrives by means of people entering into spiritual relationship, let's just say with the transcendent, to keep this somewhat simple, and increasingly living in that way in relationship with each other. So it's local. Community is initially local. It has to be. It has to have that capacity for real intimacy and real caring. Yeah. Even think about this thing I noticed in terms of just a church. Like I say, Christian church doesn't matter, but Christian church.
So that's a good point. And now he goes on to give the example that we were just kind of giving ourselves of a 1,000-person church and your capacity to really relate with the person that's talking about the cancer diagnosis they got is much decreased compared to, say, the 50 or 100-person church, where you know that person, you know their kids, and you're feeling their sadness, and in a profound way. Within your own self, you're feeling the deep sadness that they are feeling.
Yeah, and just to make a not a correction, but a further point of we're not necessarily saying that if you are atheist, you're going to become nihilistic, but more of the chances of you becoming nihilistic are pretty high. And we know this historically speaking and psychologically speaking. But the more tendency is actually just to go into the more agnostic thing. It's like, well, I can't prove it, and I'm not into the idea of the sky daddy and the woo-woo hippie crap. Not into that, but there's got to be something more than just you live to live and then you die and then you're dust. And if that is all it is, there should be deeper meaning. Well, and there is, like, even if you don't believe in an afterlife, still, like, what you do in this life affects people.
Truth.
And that lasts, well, depending on how deeply you've affected people, that can last for a very, very long time.
There are reverberations that continue on after us. So, Jordan, at this point, he gives the example of the churches, and then he moves on to talk about spiritual truth and love itself. Oops. I heard that a little bit quiet for a second there. Let's get. Where were we at? We're right about
communion, right? So there's something about this that requires real intimacy, a real embodied relationship, inescapable. All right. So when that begins to happen, when people are living in that way, and notice that all of that intimacy and real relationship is ultimately actually spiritual. There's a reason why that's possible at all. And there's what's happening there, the embodiment of the spiritual. I don't have to kind of wave over here. The fact that you can actually love anybody at all is a spiritual truth. All right. So as that begins to happen more and more, then the internet can start playing a role, right? Just the same way we talked about money, right? Ground it in depth, which depth is going to have to be intimate. It's going to have to be local. It's going to be relational. Then we can use this communications technology to do what you and I are doing. Now, we both have an experience of grief individually, our own experience of grief. Spiritually, we can connect to grief because it's that big, it's that deep. Yours is different than mine, completely, but we can connect there. Right?
In a way that's not a transactional kind of relationship either, which is what Jordan gets to now in the next clip.
Both, maybe it sounds like we can connect in humility, right? We can connect in certain things that are happening in the very, very deepest levels. And then from that place, we can find where's the right place? Where's something that we can do that's real, that's really grounded in something much larger than us, that is the right thing for us now, right? And this is not, how do I say it right? This is not transactional, right? I didn't come with an intent to accomplish anything. I didn't say, I'm going to be talking to this guy for these reasons, because none of that. Right? You reached out to me. I assume you were touched, like something hit you. You're like, you reached out to me. What did I do? I prayed. All right. Seems like something good will happen. What? No idea. Could be really embarrassing. It doesn't matter. If it's really embarrassing, then I get to hear a strong dose of humility, which I probably sorely need. But when we find that, we find a space that is akin to the feeling of communion, because of course the transcendent is actually transcendent. It doesn't care about space and time. Then we can begin the inquiry of, okay, what's supposed to happen between us? What's plausible? What's reasonable? What's called for between us? And right now, of course, I would imagine is this moment in this conversation. And to the degree which we're able to presence for anybody.
Yeah.
That'd be real good.
Yeah.
And that's how it works, right? So it's just an inversion. At the end of the day, it's a fundamental inversion. The thin and the scalable, fundamentally in service to the depth, to the deep. And that which grows, but it does not scale.
That's it. To the degree that we can present, that means be truly present in all of our relations. Can we realize this transcendent way forward together?
And bringing your presence into the present moment as well. Because like
Yes.
how often do we find ourselves, worrying about the future or cringing at the past?
Yeah, being here now.
And yeah, not actually being with the people that you're with, whether it's proximity wise or like a group of people.
Being attentive.
Yeah,
Truly here in this moment, full of care and understanding, not in our thoughts, worrying about what people are going to think, how they're going to view us, this or that, but truly from a place of heartfulness and care. And of course, this is where prayer, meditative practices come in. And Jordan spoke of this earlier in the episode that, there's very much of a process of perfecting ourselves that comes through practices. And to be able to to practice together, to fellowship together is the way that we get the feedback and the bounce back and the relation that we need with one another, that communal kind of relation that helps us do that process of perfection in a way that is helpful and useful to oneself and the broader world beyond us. Yeah. So much to reflect on here, guys. I hope that you all spend time contemplating this, take a walk and get out into some nature and just feel that presence once again, because this is why we go on vacations, isn't it? This is why we sit around a campfire or we go lay on the beach. It's because we're just trying to get to that place where the mind finally shuts off and we're just here in this moment, soaking up the sun rays, smelling the fire, being itself.
Well,
just being.
Why does the fisherman fish? Well, not commercial fishermen, but the hobby fishermen. It's not necessarily just so they can, because they release the freaking fish. So like, it's to be there.
Yeah, they're being present.
It's
fully present
being
and available
on the water and the lake and going to this place and just taking. When you fish, it's a long time of just sitting there
and being with nature gives you a sense of the sacred. That there is this underlying sacredness to reality that is ever available. We miss it so easily nowadays because we got all these high definition, screens around us. We no longer can see the stars at night because of all the light pollution. Can you imagine? Have you ever been to a planetarium or somewhere far away from civilization and you see the stars as they actually are when light pollution isn't around?
Dude,
you can actually see the Milky Way and countless stars just filling the sky. It's mind-blowing. It's a religious experience. So we've lost our sense of wonder and being able to tap back into that natural state of wonder. So helpful, and it's so fulfilling too. It literally just fills you up, and to the point where your heart is now overflowing and you want to give something back to the world in a poem or a painting or a song, or just take someone on vacation with you so they can experience this place that you love so much too.
Or in the modern era, try to take a picture of the sky and be like, look at the Milky Way, but you can't see it because unless you have really good cameras and know how to set them up, you ain't going to get that picture.
No.
And then you remove yourself from it. So in that case, the attempt of trying to share it pulls you out of it
and
as
even
well.
the 360 view of like the Northern Lights or something, that's pretty cool, but it's not actually being.
I remember the first time I saw the Milky Way. It was, I was a teenager and we were out in Temecula, California, which is high desert, so there's very little, like pollution, air pollution and stuff like that. And then, it's mostly desert, and then, your orchards, mega churches, and whatever neighborhoods that were every house looks the same, and it was unreal. And that wasn't even like the full blast of the Milky Way that you can get in some places.
Mm-hmm.
And I was, because like I grew up, in the West Virginia area, and even if you're not super light polluted in your direct area, you can still see the haze from Frederick and the haze from Winchester down to the south, and the haze from that, because we got so much freaking humidity and we're in a valley,
and car exhaust and factory exhaust and everything else. Yeah.
So it's an experience, and no wonder people would dance around the fire underneath the stars and try to give back to this great thing. No wonder that feeling you get is power. Just even thinking about it, got the goosebumps. And I really feel like we've maybe not lost the wonder, but we replaced it with something else, and I'm not sure what that something else is. You
Shiny,
know?
glitzy stuff that's
Yeah.
distracting, but it's just like how artificial food will like make you not feel hungry for a little bit and taste really good, but it doesn't actually nourish you.
Or you go into a black light room and you can kind of simulate the effect of that wow of something being, you know, so big and different, but really it's just an enclosed black light room that when
Still
you
not the
turn-
same as
yeah, it's,
seeing
I don't know how to describe it. It's
the
just something
stars with
weird.
your naked eyes in that moment. So tap back in to that sense of wonder and recognize the sacred, the sense of the sacred that is all around us and ever available. Because we certainly haven't lost our capacity for wonder. We have just not been in deep states of wonder together communally, perhaps as much as we used to experience, like, say, back during caveman times when we were just starting out, just beginning to become self reflective beings. The states of awe and wonder are readily available for us all. Look up Jason Silva's Shots of Awe. That's a great resource. He's been around for years. I'm sure he's still doing his thing out there. And, you know, find a place that is sacred to you and share that with friends and family. Be together in those places. You know, whatever it takes, find fellowship and a shared celebration of the wonderful and the transcendent. And let's work together. Let's surrender and humble ourselves before this great mystery that we all find ourselves in and develop that natural sense of reverence again. Because you don't even have to be, like we were saying before, you don't even have to be religiously oriented to be able to experience that sense of reverence for the great mystery that is this universe. We are now walking, talking extensions of this living planet. We're like the earth flavored parts of the universe that have become self aware. And what a unique and special thing to be involved in. We get to co create and write this story together, fam. So let's not be so easily divided by those divide and conquerors out there, by the manipulators that are playing off of our
natural manipulators and dividers within ourselves anyway.
See,
you
that
know?
too, man. Yeah, right.
That's the thing, is that those who can manipulate you and divide you can only do it because of the manipulator and divider within yourself that lies to you within yourself. That, you know, otherwise you'd be impervious to it if you didn't have it in yourself, because it'd just go off you.
So orient from love rather than mere self-interest. And on that note, guys, we love you. We'll see you next time. I've been Chris.
I've been DJ.
Make sure that you smash that like and subscribe button if you enjoy what we're doing here. And go on over to Benjamin Boyce's channel. The link to this video, if you'd like to watch the whole thing. There's another like 15, 20 minutes left here that we're not going to be covering. You can watch this whole video on Benjamin Boyce's channel. And I guess that's it. We'll see you guys next time.
Meow.